In this session we're going to take a brief look at some of the measuring tools and highlight some of the tools that we'll be looking at later on in the series. First of all, I'll just create a rectangle. It'll make it easier to explain some of the tools. We'll zoom in on it. First one I want to have a look at will be the tape measure tool, and it really does what it says. It actually measures from, if you click on one point, it'll measure the distance. Notice it's showing it next to the tape measure, and it's also showing it in the bottom right hand corner, and you can measure distances in any angle as long as you go from one point to another. It's exactly that. It is also a tool that is used to help scale images, but later on we'll talk more about that. So that's a measuring tool. You can measure from any point to another point. If you want to lock it in, you just click it and you'll see that it stays locked in down the bottom until you measure another point and click, and it brings up another measurement. You also have the ability to dimension objects, similar to you would in AutoCAD or a similar program, using the dimension tool up the top. So if I click on the dimension tool, and say for example I wanted to dimension the distance of that line there, I click on one point, I click at the other point, and then I drag away from it, and you can see that it puts a dimension there. If I do the same thing here, click at that point, click on that point, and it'll put the dimension there. Again, there are whole lots of different ways of changing that. You can change the dimension styles, you can have running dimensions. Again, this is just an introduction, so later on down the track you'll find out more about that. The other thing that you're able to do in SketchUp accurately, I both create and measure angles. So for example, if I put a line from this point here over to that point there, and we go to our next tool, which is our protractor tool. We click on that point to get the protractor. Now to measure that angle, we want to measure the angle from this line going around to this line here. So in other words, we're after this angle in here. We click on that point there and that point there, and then take our mark up to there, and that will tell us that that angle in there, as you can see down the bottom right corner, is 35 degrees. Now if we were to go, let's create an angle that we know what it would be. To do this, we might get rid of what is actually there. So if we select those areas, we can get rid of that. We can click on those and press delete and get rid of those. And that looks about all. So this time, instead of just making a rectangle, we'll make a perfect square, and we'll say make it 3000, 3000. So it's a square that's 3 meters. Now we know in a square that angle, all the 4 angles are 90 degrees, and we can check that with our protractor. So if we click there and there, and we go around to that side and click there, you can see down the bottom it's 90 degrees. So between that line and that line is 90 degrees. If we divide that in halves, we then should know that the distance between, the angle between there and there is 45 degrees. So yet again we can check that. Click there and go around to that point there, click on it, and as you can see down the bottom is measured at 45 degrees. You can also use the protractor tool to actually create guides. Say for example we wanted an angle in here of 37 degrees. In other words, we want to be able to put a line 37 degrees away from this point. So we click on there, go in this direction, type in 37 and press enter. Now what we need to do, if we draw a line from there and where that guide intersects that line, we've now created, and we can check that again, we've now created an angle of 37 degrees. So you can use the protractor tool in a number of ways. The last one I just want to mention briefly is a text tool, and it does a couple of things. If you click on a point and you want to highlight something, it gives you an arrow going to that particular point, and then you can type in whatever you want to into that particular area. We will be using those later on, but down the track. Okay, the other tools I'm not going to go through today. We will come across them. There's the axes tool, in case you want to relocate this axis somewhere, just to give you an idea. I can shift it to there, and you can see how it actually changes the axis point. But I'll talk more about how you use that later on. We've got a 3D text tool, and then these tools are 5 here: the orbit tool, the pan tool, the zoom extents tool, the previous, and the next tool. They're really more for viewing different areas of the interface, and the same applies with these. They're all viewing tools that we will look at later on